Hello everyone, this is Scott Ferguson, Principal Architect with ServiceNow. And for the next few minutes, I want to talk to you a little bit about continuous controls monitoring within ServiceNow. So as we start to look at this demo, right, there's some other pieces that you may want to wrap around this contextually, right? In front of this, you may have a conversation around policy management. You may have a conversation around authoritative documents, regulations, bringing them into the platform. There also may be some additional conversations that you have when it comes to risk management and how controls are used to mitigate those risks and continuously monitor those to understand risk exposure. But what we want to focus on here today is specifically around that continuous controls monitoring of controls. This is really a differentiator for ServiceNow in this space. It's something that we can do that many other solutions in the space cannot do. We start looking at the functionality. We start on our policy overview dashboard, and this is really where a compliance manager or someone who works in the GRC space would come to look at how are we doing from a overall compliance within ServiceNow. At first glance, what we see is I've got over 800 of my controls that are compliant. I may have some that are still in flight, maybe some that are not applicable. A control was assigned to an individual and it didn't apply to their particular environment, so it's flagged as not applicable. The ones that are still in flight may be being assessed, tested to. And then I've got very easy insight into those that are non-compliant. In this case, there's 103 controls that are non-compliant. And I want to focus on those particular controls. So as we drill into, as you're familiar with any report or dashboard within ServiceNow, right, they're actionable. You can click into them, get to the details that are behind them. I get a list of controls that are non-compliant. Now, I feel like it's a pretty bold statement for us to say this control is non-compliant and to be able to actively update the status of that from compliant to non-compliant systematically. Traditionally, organizations spend time manually assessing a control, and we're doing it automatically. Let's look at some of these controls, and we'll focus on a couple here for financial accounting. I can quickly see, some of these controls that are non-compliant. So let's look at this one around establishing and maintaining a patch management program. Now, before we talk about how I was able to see that it was non-compliant, let's talk a little bit about the control itself. There's a life cycle to a control. A control gets identified, through our entities and the entity types within ServiceNow, but this control gets assigned to an owner. So James is assigned this control for financial accounting that says you need to maintain patch management program, and throughout that life cycle, right, James has to attest to that control that yes, I've implemented it within my environment. It goes through a review stage where the second line of defense or the compliance team looks at that evidence and says yes, it looks like this control is implemented, and it moves to the monitor state, which is where continuous controls monitoring comes in. We can now actively validate, did James, right, is he doing what he needs to do to ensure compliance within the environment? This control may tie back to different citations, right, authoritative sources. It may tie back to a policy. Regardless of how it was assigned, right, we want to make sure that we're proving compliance to this. A couple of other things I'll point out here is that, it's an operational type of control. There's reputational types, there's financial, but also notice that the classification is preventative. We've got preventative controls that are going to keep bad things from happening. In this case, if we patch our systems before they're exploited, we can keep bad things from happening in the environment, where you may have detective controls because we may not be able to keep bad things from happening, but we want to very quickly detect that is out of compliance and be able to respond to it. So we've got different types or classifications of controls. Regardless, there's a control here that we want to manage. There's a couple of things here at the bottom, and we can see there's an issue associated to this. And, in this case, it says that something bad has happened. It says an indicator has failed, and this issue that's been generated is what's flipped the status of this to non-compliant because there's something wrong in the environment. Now, if we move over to this indicators related list here at the bottom, what we'll see is that there's an indicator, and this is where the continuous controls monitoring really comes into play, is we have this indicator that is going to actively evaluate data within the ServiceNow platform and check to see if the control that has been implemented is actually doing what it said it should do. Now, another example of this that we won't show in this demo may be segregation of duties. Sarbanes-Oxley requires segregation of duties. Other regulations require segregation of duties, and it's really to prevent collusion or people from committing fraudulent activity. So what that regulation may say is that the person that's requested a change be made in the environment can't be the person that implements it, and this keeps people from introducing bad code. Well, we can actively monitor that. You can look at the change request table within ServiceNow and see, is the requester the implementer, is the approver, are they different individuals, in which case we can prove segregation of duties. And that's what this indicator is going to give us the ability to do, is if we find a failure condition or something that doesn't match what the known good should be, then automatically alert someone and take some sort of corrective action. Now, for this specific control, we would think that the data that we would want to look at is, well, are there vulnerabilities logged against assets that support financial accounting that have not been patched? And if there are, then we're not adhering to a good patch management program. So let's take a look at this particular indicator, the supporting data section here. We're going to see a couple of things. We're going to actively monitor or look at the vulnerable item table within ServiceNow. Now, yes, this requires, in this example, that you have also subscribed to our vulnerability response suite of products from the security business unit. But in this case, if that table is there and you're populating it, you may have information coming in from multiple vulnerability scanners. That data is coming in through the vulnerability response application. It's being tied to assets within the system and gets identified as a vulnerable item. From a GRC perspective, because we want to ensure that people are adhering to the patch management program, I can look at that application and say, well, let's take a look at the vulnerable item table. I want to pull back data as evidence, like, well, when was the vulnerability found? What was its vulnerability score? What's its impact to confidentiality, integrity, and availability? And we're going to capture that as evidence. We only care about open vulnerabilities, and in this case, I only care about vulnerabilities that may have an impact to my confidentiality, my availability, and my integrity, where that impact is complete. I only care about those ones that were found more than 7 days ago, right? Because it means they haven't gotten around to it. It's still outstanding, and we want to take some sort of action. So we're able to actually monitor data within the system. If we find something that matches, we want to put this asset, right? We want to say it's non-compliant, and we want to take some sort of corrective action. Now, where we'll see this, we can see that we're looking for a condition, and we're going to run this every single week. So the system, this is where that continuous monitoring comes in. We can run this on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, daily basis based upon the scenario. We'll have to understand which one is the most important. But in this case, because we're going to look at this on a weekly basis, because we may only patch on weekends, on a Monday, we're going to look at things that haven't been patched in the last week. And the last couple of times this is ran, you can see here that it's actually failed. And we could drill into that and get to the specific vulnerabilities exploitable here and may increase the risk to our organization. But the fact that these failed, it's unchecked. And if we move back, because this indicator failed, that's what actually updated the status of this control to non-compliant. Because when an indicator fails, it's going to update the status to non-compliant. It's going to create an issue, right? And we're going to see here, if we go back to this issue, we can drill into the issue that was generated by that indicator failure. An issue is a task-based record, and it's been assigned to James, right? That owner of SAP Financial Accounting. So when James comes in, he looks at his My Work queue, he can see, oh, I have a new issue assigned to me on Monday. And in this case, it's because in the related list down here, we see that indicator, that validate patches have been deployed indicator, failed on August 26th, and he can then go take corrective action, understand why something wasn't patched. He can go figure out what needs to happen to resolve this particular issue to get his control back to compliant and work. So we see that issue that's been assigned. There's going to be SLAs, the notifications, all the capabilities that exist within task management within ServiceNow are going to apply to this issue as well. As we wrap up this conversation, we're going to move then to our compliance overview. So we started with our policy overview. We were very quickly able to get to a control that was non-compliant because of a policy that may have been set forth by the organization. When we look at the compliance overview dashboard, right, we see a little bit different spin on this data. We still have all the same number of controls, but instead of being tied back to a particular control, it's going to be tied to a particular regulation. And someone that may be a compliance manager here, right? Grace may care about, maybe an auditor's coming in and they're going to do a PCI audit, or maybe this is a public sector customer and, they have to prove compliance to a FedRAMP or something to that effect. Maybe it's a retailer that has to look at something around payment card industry, protecting that particular data. Regardless of what that may be, here on our compliance overview, I can do something like, well, let's drill into PCI. I can select that slice of the pie, so to speak, and now very quickly get to here, I've got 32 non-compliant controls specifically tied back to PCI. The power of continuous controls monitoring within ServiceNow, it's because ServiceNow takes this asset-centric view of compliance, because we assign controls out through those entities and the entity types to individual assets, right? And an asset can be a piece of technology, it can be a location, it can be a department, it can be a company. They can use the indicators to actively look at data that exists within the ServiceNow platform, whether it's IT service management data, operations data, security data, HR data, whatever that may be, and evaluate that control against those items in the environment to prove compliance actively, and then only have to respond through issues management to those things that are non-compliant, saving them time and alerting them very quickly to those things they need to get back on track. Thank you for your time today.